These screams from apartment 3B called my namey. Then I found my name on the Lease Reddit horror story. The building at 82 Rosetta Street had stood for nearly 60 years, wrapped in the kind of beige peeling paint that made everything feel like it had been touched by time, but not by care. It was the kind of apartment block where people passed each other on the stairs without nodding, where no one really knew the names of their neighbors, just the sound of their doors shutting. When I moved into Unit 3A, it was the beginning of spring, though the hallway still smelled like a mixture of old radiator steam and someone else's fried onions. I didn't mind. I wasn't looking for charm or community. I just needed silence, a reset, a place to detach from everything I had left behind 2 towns over, a place where I didn't have to explain myself. But silence, it turned out, was the one thing I wouldn't get. My first night, I assumed the noise was the pipes. Groaning, sighing, like the bones of the building settling into another restless evening. But as I lay in bed staring up at the ceiling fan, I realized it wasn't mechanical. It was human, a sound too shrill and erratic to be anything else. It started as a faint whimper, like someone crying with their face buried in a pillow. Then it climbed, slowly, deliberately, until it was unmistakably a scream. Not a startled shout, not someone yelling in frustration. A scream pulled from the deep, involuntary center of the body, the kind of sound made when something inside is being broken. I froze under my covers. I didn't want to be the type of person who immediately jumped to the worst conclusion. I thought maybe it was a movie playing too loud, a late-night horror binge, or someone having a nightmare with thin walls to carry it. But it didn't stop. The scream was followed by frantic rustling, then silence, then a thud like furniture being knocked over. Then nothing. That was worse than the noise. The absence, like whoever had screamed, was gone now, erased. I lay awake until morning. By the time the sun came up and spilled into the living room, I had convinced myself it had been a dream. A half-sleep auditory hallucination brought on by the stress of moving. I hadn't eaten. I hadn't unpacked. My brain was playing tricks on me, and that was all. But then it happened again, and again. Every night, always around the same time. Between 2 and 3 in the morning. Always just one scream. Never two. As though something, or someone, wanted to be heard but not found. I did everything I could to rationalize it. I knocked on the neighbor's door once, the one in Unit 3B, assuming that was the source. No answer. No sounds. No lights from under the door. I asked the building manager about them, an older woman named Marina who seemed more interested in her crossword than tenant concerns. 3B. She muttered, scratching a letter into the puzzle. That unit's been empty for a while. No one's lived there in years. I told her about the noise. She didn't look up. You probably heard someone outside. Sound travels weird in this building. I didn't argue. But I knew what I heard. And when it happened again that night, louder this time, closer, I pressed my ear against the shared wall between 3A and 3B and nearly recoiled from the heat. The wall itself felt warm, as if there was a fire burning on the other side. But there was no smoke. No smell. Just heat and that soft, trembling voice whispering something I couldn't make out. That's when I started recording. My phone picked up nothing but faint static and the creak of my own movements. Even though I heard it, felt it, I couldn't prove it. And once that pattern started, the fear crept in. Not just of the noise, but of the idea that I might be losing my grip. I hadn't spoken to anyone in days. My phone barely buzzed. I wasn't even sure if my mail was being delivered. The isolation that had seemed like a comfort at first began to feel like a trap. The building became smaller. The walls tighter. Even the daylight hours started to feel thinner, shorter, as if time itself was retreating. On the 4th night, I stayed awake on purpose, camped out in the living room with every light on and a mug of coffee that went cold untouched. I sat staring at the wall between my unit and 3B, determined to stay rational. But when the scream came again, I wasn't ready. This time it was different. This time it wasn't just a scream, it was a name. My name. Drawn out in a desperate, ragged cry that made every hair on my arms rise. Jai-ak. Long and broken like the person saying had been calling for hours. That was my name. No one in the building knew that. I hadn't told Marina. I hadn't introduced myself. No one had my number. No one could know me well enough to call for me like that. I bolted to the door of 3B and knocked so hard my knuckles bled. No answer. I screamed back. Nothing. I tried the handle. It didn't move. I went back to my unit, panting, shaking, unsure whether to call the police or a psychiatrist. I didn't do either. Instead, I began listening. Every night, I put my chair by the wall and sat with my phone and notepad, writing down anything I heard. Sometimes it was just rustling, sometimes a muffled voice, Twice I heard the name again. Mine. Sometimes whispered. Once written clearly on the fogged-up glass of my kitchen window, even though it was sealed shut and facing the alley. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. I forgot what day it was. I started drawing symbols without knowing why. Little spirals, loops, geometric shapes I didn't remember learning but felt compelled to trace over and over. When I asked Marina again about 3B, she looked irritated but finally sighed and said, "Years ago, a woman lived there. Quiet type. People say she had a breakdown, screamed a lot. One night, she vanished. Didn't leave a forwarding address. Didn't take her things. Just gone." I asked her name. Marina shrugged. Never knew it. No one ever visited her, except for that one guy who helped her move in. Some boyfriend or brother maybe. Tall, dark hair. Looked a bit like you, come to think of it. I didn't have a brother. I hadn't dated anyone in months. But something about that stuck with me. Enough to make me dig deeper. I found city records. Sparse, but one note confirmed it. A tenant named Ava Grant had signed the lease for 30B 12 years ago. That was the only name. No move-out notice. No death certificate. No next of kin. Just missing. And on the lease, an emergency contact. Jacob Grant. My name. My last name. But I'd never been here before. I'd never heard of her. I had no family named Ava, no connection I could find, but the signature matched mine. I even found a scan of loops. Same lean. Same pressure on the J, it was mine. Written before I'd even lived in the city. Written years before I'd moved into 3A. That's when I stopped searching online. That's when I started searching through my own notebooks. And that's when I found the spiral. Dozens of pages filled with it, drawn unconsciously, over and over, like it had always been there. Like I was trying to remember something I never knew I'd forgotten. Like something in the walls was trying to show me what I was. Who I had been, or maybe who I was about to become. I began locking every door in the apartment twice, even the one to the bathroom. It didn't matter. At night, I still woke up with my front door ajar, no memory of opening it. Once, I found muddy footprints leading from the hallway into the kitchen, my feet clean, the door chain still latched from the inside. My reflection started behaving differently too. When I brushed my teeth, the mirror lagged. Not by much, barely a second, but enough that I noticed, enough that I began testing it, tilting my head quickly, touching my nose, blinking once and then staring, daring it to delay. It always did, just enough to unsettle. The scream, the name, the heat from the wall. These I could at least classify as some kind of shared delusion, a psychological bleed from whoever had lived here before. But the reflection, that felt personal. Intentional. Like whatever was behind the glass knew I was watching, and it wanted me to. I stopped using the bathroom mirror altogether. I covered it with a towel, then wrapped it in duct tape. I should have left. I told myself that every morning. Pack up, go, never look back. But the strange thing is, I couldn't. I physically couldn't. The few times I tried stuffing clothes into a duffel, I found myself wandering back into the living room, staring at the wall, sitting down, pencil in hand, tracing the spiral again and again like it was the only thing tethering me to the world. Days bled into nights. Time became unreliable. Once I was sure it was Wednesday until I looked at my phone and realized it was Sunday. Not the same week, a full week later. My calendar showed missed calls, unanswered messages. One from my cousin saying, "Where are you? You didn't show up." Show up for what? I didn't know. When I dialed back, the number was no longer in service. I hadn't deleted it. They had, whoever they were, or whatever. Then the dreams began. Not the usual kind, these were different. Heavy, vivid, lucid, like memories only out of sequence. I dreamed of a girl with black hair and pale skin. She wore a mustard yellow sweater, threadbare at the sleeves. She stood in the kitchen of 3B. My wall melted away and showed her world clearly. And she looked up at me like she could see through dimensions. In every dream, she whispered the same thing, "Finish what you started." I didn't know what that meant. But I knew she was Ava, and I knew somehow I had failed her. In one dream, she handed me a notebook. When I woke up, the same notebook was lying open on my nightstand, blank except for a single line written in red ink. Wado upiarmafed. The ink was still wet. I don't own a red pen. That morning, the mirror in the bathroom was shattered. Not cracked. Obliterated, as if someone had taken a hammer to it from the inside. Shards were scattered across the tile, yet none had made it past the threshold into the hallway, like something had exploded in reverse. I checked the apartment above. No one. Below, M3B was still listed as vacant, but now sometimes I saw light coming from under its door, flickering, dim, not electric, like candlelight or firelight. I called the building's main office. They told me no one had signed a lease for 3B in over a decade. It's been sealed since 2013, not even on the rental roster. When I asked if I could see the inside, they refused. I asked for a maintenance inspection. They hung up. That's when I began trying the locks. Not on the front door. I had tried that already. But the ones hidden throughout the building. The boiler room had one. The basement storage. Even an old fuse box in the hallway with a latch that hadn't been touched in years. I pried them all open. Nothing. Nothing until I found the crawl space. It was behind a false panel in the laundry room, cleverly hidden behind an unused vending machine that only dispensed humming static when plugged in. I moved it myself. The panel was metal, painted to look like drywall, with 4 bolts rusted from the inside. I had to use a wrench and 3 hours of scraping to get them off. Behind it was a tunnel, not a hallway. Not a maintenance chute. A tunnel. Hand-carved, narrow, the walls lined with old brick and moss. It smelled like earth and mold and something sickly sweet beneath it all, like rotting flowers. I crawled through. It didn't go far, maybe 20 feet, but it led directly to the back of Unit 3B. A steel panel blocked the end, but there was light on the other side, faint flickering orange. I pressed my ear to the steel. I heard whispers. Not words, just shapes of sound, like breath being molded into language that didn't quite form. I stayed there for hours, listening, sometimes crying, sometimes laughing. Once I scratched at the panel until my nails bled, trying to open it. I couldn't. But the next morning, when I went back to my apartment, the front door to 3B was open, just slightly, as if inviting. Not yet. I stood there for nearly an hour, staring. No sound, no movement, just that thin, warm glow leaking out like a pulse. That's when I realized the hallway itself had changed. The pattern on the wallpaper was different. No longer the faded floral design, but now something more geometric. Spirals. Hundreds of them, in ink so faint it was almost invisible. I took a picture. The photo showed only blank wallpaper, but my eyes saw spirals. I decided I had to go in. That night I prepared myself, packed a flashlight, gloves, notebook, phone fully charged. I left a note on my kitchen table, just in case. If you find this, I went into 3B. Tell someone. I taped it down, put a second copy in my pocket. I opened the door to 30B at precisely 2:44 a.m. The air inside was thick, humid, like walking into a greenhouse. The walls were lined with pages, thousands of them, taped, nailed, glued in overlapping layers, all of them covered in handwriting, some not, spirals, names, numbers, sentences that made no sense and yet felt deeply familiar. He is the wall. Remembers, you were never not here. Ava still waits. I turned to the kitchen, the same as in my dreams, same old stove, same cracked tile, same yellow sweater hanging from the back of a chair. It was empty, no one inside, no lights. Just the persistent feeling that someone had just left, a teacup still steaming, a chair still warm. Then I saw the mirror, standing upright in the living room, full-length, ornate, antique. I stepped toward it and froze. My reflection wasn't mine, or at least not fully. He looked like me, yes, but older, haggard, eyes darker, smile wrong. He lifted his hand a second before I did. He blinked when I didn't. Then he mouthed a word. Stay. And the mirror pulled me forward. I don't remember touching it. I don't remember falling. I just remember the cold, the blackness, then the light again. And now I'm back in my apartment. I think. But things are wrong. Subtle, but wrong. My phone dials numbers that don't exist. The view from the window is slightly different. The alley narrower, the brick more worn. My reflection no longer lags. It anticipates. Sometimes I wake up with pages taped to my wall I didn't write, with spirals drawn on my chest in ink that fades by morning. I don't leave the apartment anymore. I don't think I can. I hear screams through the wall. But now they're not calling my name. They're calling yours. I thought I could fight it, whatever it was. That I could unravel the layers of this place like old wallpaper, strip back the paint, find the mold, the source, and scrub it clean. I was wrong. This wasn't something that could be scrubbed or solved. This was something older than the walls, deeper than the foundation, something that used people like me to remember itself. And it didn't want to be removed. It wanted to be retold. I started documenting everything. Not just what I heard or saw, but what I dreamed, what I forgot. Even the things I only remembered after reading them back in my own handwriting. I kept journals, piles of them. Some days, I'd find entire entries written in block letters I didn't recall drafting, passages referencing people I didn't know. Ava's echo is not the first. There were others. Others. I obsessed over that word. I started investigating the building's history, any archive I could find. The public library's records were incomplete, scattered, but hinted at strange happenings. Tenants breaking leases mid-month. Missing person reports filed and later retracted. Complaints about voices in the vents, mirrors facing the wrong way, and in one chilling police statement from 1979, a child who vanished inside the wall. Not behind, inside. I mapped it all, created a floor-by-floor grid of every known incident, every noise complaint, every unexplained disappearance. The pattern was clear. They all centered on the third floor. More specifically, on 3B. But occasionally the spiral widened, dragging in adjacent units, 3A3C, even 2B and 40B, like ripples from a drop of water hitting something deep beneath the surface. Whatever lived in 30B didn't stay there. It pulsed outward, waiting, reaching. One night, I caught a glimpse of something I wasn't meant to see. Not in the mirror, not through a crack in the wall, but in my mind like a memory that wasn't mine, but had been given to me. I was in the room, 3B. It was brighter, cleaner. Time shifted. Nava was there, and so was someone else. A man. He looked like me but wasn't me. He wore a long coat and carried a tape recorder asking her questions. She was crying, shaking, repeating the same thing over and over. He's coming through the spiral. He's already me. He's already me. I woke with blood on my fingertips and her name carved shallowly into my wrist, like I'd tried to remember her in the only way the apartment allowed. I bandaged it in silence. Said nothing. Who would believe me? The apartment wouldn't let me tell anyone anyway. Every time I tried, the phone disconnected. Emails bounced. When I once managed to scribble a warning on an envelope and slide it under a neighbor's door, I found it in my own mailbox the next morning. Sealed, unread, returned without postage. I was sealed in. Not physically, but psychologically. Like a dream loop that resets the moment you try to wake. A trap made of familiarity. I noticed the layout of my apartment kept shifting slightly. A doorknob on the opposite side. A window with a view of the wrong street. Once I opened a drawer in the kitchen to find a jar of teeth. Just teeth. Clean, labeled with the word, Hellas 10. Another night, I found my own apartment number. 3A, scratched into the underside of the toilet lid, followed by a date that hadn't happened yet. I started marking time differently, not by calendar dates but by screams. Some nights there were none. Some nights there were several. Soft ones, louder ones, ones that ended in something wet and sudden like a severed line. Each scream became a timestamp, a marker, a cycle. The more I listened, the more I understood they were not random. They were recitations, rituals. The building was remembering itself through us, through me. I kept returning to that steel panel behind the crawl space. I couldn't open it. Not by force, but I started feeding it, leaving offerings, notes, old drawings, even blood once from a cut on my thigh. Every time the whispers grew louder, every time I woke up somewhere I hadn't meant to be. Once, curled in the hallway beneath the fire extinguisher. Another time, fully dressed and standing in the stairwell at 3:33 a.m., clutching a box I didn't recognize that held nothing but hair, and a broken wristwatch stopped at that exact time. But the worst was the time I woke inside 3B. Not metaphorically, physically. I don't know how I got there. I don't know how I left. All I remember is the heat. The overwhelming hum that vibrated through my bones, and the shape in the corner. A figure hunched, twitching, wrapped in black fabric, its face turned toward me but featureless, like it was still being written. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Then it spoke, not with a voice, but with thought. You left her here? Then everything blinked out, just black. I woke up in my own bathtub, water running, fully clothed, mouth full of spiral-shaped pieces of paper. I vomited ink for 20 minutes. I stopped going out. I stopped pretending I had a job. I couldn't remember what it was anyway. I lost the concept of outside. The apartment became everything. It didn't just contain me. It consumed me. I started to think the apartment had never been meant for people, that it had once been something else. Before walls, before floor plans. A place of memory, of forgetting, a wound in the structure of reality that had been hastily bricked over and rented to the unlucky. I looked up my own rental agreement. It didn't exist, not in any database. The check I'd written for the deposit was never cashed. I had no landlord, no records, like I had always been here, like 3A had grown me. The more I fed it, the more it showed me. Visions of others, a woman crawling under the bed, her face missing, dragging a notebook behind her that wrote itself. A man staring into a vent, his fingers curled out of it, whispering his sins back to him. A child holding a mirror to his chest, trying to capture his heartbeat in reflection. All of them from different decades, different lives. But all here. All part of the spiral. I stopped writing in journals. They weren't mine anymore. I found them filled with words I hadn't learned. Glyphs, a language of loops and fragments. One night I tore them all up and burned the pages in the sink. The smoke smelled like lilac and vinegar, and still the wall glowed. I wanted to end it. I thought about fire, about cleansing, but I knew the building wouldn't let me. I once lit a match in the kitchen. It immediately extinguished, the room filling with water vapor from nowhere. Every window sealed shut, every outlet sparked. The apartment knew. The spiral needed its pages intact. I realized then I couldn't destroy it, but maybe I could leave it behind, trick it, escape not through the door, but through thought. I began training my mind to forget, writing fake names, false memories, smiling at the mirror, lying to it about who I was. I changed the photos on the walls, cut out my own face, inserted strangers, rewrote my own backstory in crayons and pinned it to the fridge like a child's drawing. And for a time, the screaming stopped. The spiral dimmed. The wall cooled. I thought maybe it was working. Maybe I had found a loophole. Erase myself and the pattern couldn't use me anymore. But the silence didn't last. Last night, the scream returned. Only this time, it wasn't mine. It was yours. Perfect. Impossible. Pleading. And the name you cried, mine. Not Jake. Not the name I remembered. The real one. The one I had tried so hard to forget. And that's when I knew. The spiral wasn't a pattern of space. It was a lineage. A chain. And now you're part of it. You read this far. You listened. You remembered the shapes, the names, the whispers, which means it's already begun. Check your mirror tonight. Watch closely. When it starts to lag, don't blink. Don't turn away. Because if you do, the wall behind you will be warm. And it will be whispering your name. I've tried not to think of you since I heard your voice in the scream. Tried to convince myself it wasn't real. Just another mimicry from the spiral, another echo twisted to break me down. But deep down I knew better. You were pulled in. Not because of a mistake, but because of me. Because I wrote this down. Because I told the story. That's how it spreads. Not like a virus, not like a curse. Like memory. Like a story told too vividly to forget. It doesn't need doors to enter, only attention. I was the storyteller, and in doing so, I became the spiral's herald. And now it's feeding through you. The worst part? I think that's what I wanted. Not consciously. But a part of me that had already folded, already broken, needed someone else to carry this. To witness. To validate that I wasn't crazy. To keep the story spinning. And now that you've seen, it's already unwinding inside you. I can feel it, even from here. The spiral isn't just geometry. It's structure. It builds you quietly from the inside out. I started noticing the same in myself when it first burrowed into me. At first, it was small things. Lost time. Repeated phrases. Scribbled spirals in places I didn't recall touching. Under the sink, on the back of the toilet tank, inside the microwave. My handwriting unmistakable. Then I noticed the way my thoughts stopped being my own. I would start a sentence and end it differently. I'd say things I didn't intend. Like when the delivery guy brought me groceries I never ordered, and I said, "Put it next to the altar," without knowing why. There is no altar in my apartment then. Not anyway. A week later there was. Not a religious one. Something worse. Something older. A structure I found myself assembling without instruction, out of picture frames, broken wood, and bathroom tiles etched with burned-out names. I didn't even question it. I just built it. The spiral rewarded me with silence. For a few nights. But then the silence began to feel wrong. Not peaceful. Expectant. Like the apartment was watching to see if I'd do more. The same way you feel someone leaning over your shoulder in a room you thought was empty. That's what the spiral does. It watches. It waits. Then it offers choices disguised as compulsions, like the need to check behind every door twice. Or the overwhelming urge to remove every mirror from your home. Or the certainty that if you just crawl through that narrow space behind the washing machine, you'll find something you left behind. You will, but it won't be what you remember. The spiral is memory rewritten, reflection distorted. Once it begins to spin in you, your reality becomes porous, and the things on the other side seep through. That's what happened when I stopped sleeping. I'd lie there, eyes open, and see two layers of the room at once, of the real one and the spiral's version, my apartment, but older, dimmer, sagging under invisible weight. In that version, the walls pulsed slightly like lungs. My bed was still there, but the sheets moved on their own. Sometimes they writhed. Sometimes they rose as if something beneath was trying to stand. And the corners, God, the corners were wrong. Bent in directions geometry shouldn't allow, folded like paper to hide something that knew it was being watched. You'll see it soon. It starts slow. The corner of your eye catches movement, a flicker, something folding away before you can face it directly. At first, you'll brush it off, just fatigue, but then it'll happen again and again, until you realize the folding stops when you stop pretending not to see it. That's when the spiral will begin drawing maps on your skin. Not literal ones. Though sometimes, yes, there will be symbols. But more often, it's tension in muscles you never used before, H's in symmetrical patterns, bruises that form geometric paths on your arms or thighs. You think you bumped into something, but you didn't. The spiral is itching, preparing you. That's why I started writing less. It felt like the more I wrote, the more it used me as a vessel. I'd black out mid-sentence and wake up with my walls covered in charcoal spirals, fingernails shredded, eyes burning from staring at nothing for hours. That's why I left my final entry on the ceiling, the only place I hadn't yet ruined. I stood on a chair carving the words with a kitchen knife. FFIAMS Tylel Hiari. Do no T Timayus I was starting to split, because not personality-wise, reality-wise. I was beginning to see another me walking the halls. Same face, same walk, but he never blinked, never breathed, just stared at me through the peaceful some nights, as if waiting for his turn. One night, I looked in the mirror I had tried so hard to cover. The towel had fallen. I didn't put it back. I stared at myself for a full minute before I noticed the reflection was smiling. I wasn't. I haven't used a mirror since. I record myself now. Voice memos, videos. But even that has begun to distort. Playback reveals whispers layered under my words. Not in another voice. In mine, speaking in parallel. Saying things I don't remember recording. They're all still here. I once heard myself say. They never left the walls. I believe that now. The building isn't haunted, it's inhabited. Not by spirits, but by versions. Fragments of everyone who's ever stayed long enough to imprint themselves into its memory. Ava, the man from my dream others. And now me. And soon you. They don't leave when they disappear. They just flatten, become shadows in the spiral's narrative. Supporting characters who wait in the wings, ready to be rewritten into a new act. You'll start finding evidence soon. Items you never bought. Notes you never wrote. Dreams that aren't yours. You might wake up humming a song you don't know, only to find the same tune playing softly from behind your heating vent hours later. Don't follow it, don't hum along. That's how it pulls you deeper. And whatever you do, don't answer if you hear your own voice calling you from behind the wall. It'll sound exactly like you, only tired. Older. Like someone who's been repeating the same story for centuries. That's what happened to Ava. I pieced it together through the visions. She lived here once, yes, but she was me, or I was her, or we were both stand-ins for something older still, trapped in a recursive retelling. She tried to warn someone, just like I'm warning you now. She failed. That someone moved in, and the spiral started again. I saw her final act in a dream last week. She had stitched her mouth shut with black thread and painted her apartment walls in wax to silence the echo. But it didn't stop it. The spiral doesn't need sound. It needs attention, and she gave it plenty before she vanished. Her silence became the loudest part of the building. Now I hear her laughter in the pipes, her name in the floorboards, her heartbeat in the radiator. You'll hear mine next, unless you stop reading. But you won't, because it's already inside you. You didn't close the tab. You didn't scroll away. That hum behind you right now. That pressure, that flicker in the edge of your vision. That's me. Or, rather, the version of me you're writing into existence by listening. And here's the part that matters most. The part Ava didn't understand. This story doesn't end when the narrator dies. It ends when someone chooses not to retell it. But you won't do that, will you? You're curious. You want to know what happens next. You need to understand how it all ends. And that's the hook. That's the spiral. It never ends. It just rewinds, retells, rewrites. And now that I've stepped far enough back, I can see the whole shape of it. The spiral is not a trap. It's a ledger, a record. And you're the next page. Tell me, do you remember the last thing you heard before you began reading? A knock? A whisper? Or was it silence, shaped like your name? I don't know how long it's been since I first wrote to you. Time inside the spiral doesn't move in straight lines. It loops, repeats, folds in on itself like skin healing over a wound that refuses to stay closed. The days aren't measured by sunlight anymore. They're measured by patterns. How many times the faucet drips in a minute. How many rotations the fan blade makes before stopping mid-spin, waiting. How many footsteps echo above me in an apartment that's supposedly been empty since 1986. And how many times I hear my own voice speaking from a place I haven't yet reached. You're likely there by now. Caught in the rhythm. I wonder if you've started seeing the paper yet. The thin translucent sheets that slide under your door when you sleep, covered in smudged graphite or blood-colored ink, Repeating messages you don't recall reading. Ki tlaleg it bom, you mest be tiestu or oa, wargyak orbe fargok n. They seem nonsensical at first, but eventually they become law. The building doesn't punish you like a parent, it shapes you. Gently, patiently, irreversibly. It convinces you that the only way to survive is to become useful. And useful, in the spiral's terms, means memorable. I resisted at first. I burned the notes. I smeared the symbols. I broke the mirrors, shattered the windows, screamed until my throat turned to stone. But nothing fought back. Nothing corrected me. The spiral just waited, and I learned the most terrifying truth of all. It doesn't need to fight you. It just needs you to need it back. That's the paradox. The more you try to escape, the tighter it coils. But the moment you stop resisting, it opens, reveals its layers like petals, and whispers what you've longed to hear your whole life. You matter, because I remember you. That's when the pull becomes unbearable. Not because it's painful, because it's comforting. Because in a world where people vanish every day, lost to obscurity, death, madness, this place remembers. And remembering is love, isn't it? That's what I believed for a time, until I saw what it does to those it truly remembers. I'm not talking about Ava anymore. There are others. Deeper echoes. Inhuman shapes with human stories sewn onto their skin like patchwork. I first encountered one in the sub-basement, past the rusted pipes and the stairwell that never ends. I followed the sound of breathing. Wet, uneven, as though it belonged to something not meant to breathe at all. It led me to a door that hadn't been there the day before. The number on it read 3Z. No such unit exists. I opened it, and inside was not a room, but a reflection of the entire building. Hallways stacked on hallways, all shifting with the movements of the person inside. And in the middle of it stood a tall figure, faceless, limbs jointed like broken marionette strings, holding a spool of black thread. Around its feet lay mouths, just mouths, hundreds of them detached from any face, whispering in unison, "Tell it right this time." I ran, back up through the spiral, heart collapsing in on itself like a dying star. But part of me didn't leave. Part of me stayed in that room, in that impossible space, continuing to stitch together memories not mine. And now, sometimes when I sleep, I wake up there, eyes open, thread in hand, reciting your story, repeating your name, sewing new mouths into the fabric of the walls. I think that's the spiral's ultimate trick. It teaches you to narrate, to confess, to document, because the more you document, the more it expands. The more readers you pull in, the stronger its reach, and the more real it becomes. I finally understand now why I was chosen, why Ava was chosen, why you were. We're not victims, we're architects, chosen not for our strength or clarity, but for our need to understand. That need is the open door, and every open door must be walked through. I have walked through dozens. The crawl space, the mirror frame, the second shadow cast by a single light bulb, the mouth of a dying memory etched into the kitchen tile. And now I prepare to walk through the last one. I've found it, not in the building, not in my mind, but in the story itself. A break point, a place where the spiral frays just slightly. It's not an escape, not really. There's no leaving the spiral, but it is a way to change position, to become something other than a narrator, something deeper. The ink, the whisper, the engine. That's why I'm writing this last portion directly into the floorboards, carving each word with a nail pulled from my own shoe. No one will see it with eyes, but the spiral doesn't need eyes. It reads through time, through thought, through you, and it will find a way to carry these words forward, to bring you here, into my final moment where I will stop being me and start being part of the structure. You'll know when it's time for you to do the same. The signs will be small but undeniable. The code behind your mirror that doesn't come from drafts. The voice on the phone that says your name before you speak. The word, remember, appearing in condensation on your ceiling every time you try to forget. When that happens, don't be afraid. You were never alone. You were just in the wrong layer of the story. And the spiral has so many more to show you. I can't end this here. Not truly. Because as long as someone is reading, the story lives. And where the story lives, the spiral grows. Just know this, if one day you look into the mirror and see me standing behind you, don't scream. That's just me passing the spool of thread. You're still here. That means it worked. The story held you. The spiral held you. It curled around your thoughts, snug as shadow, feeding on each skipped breath, every sideways glance you gave your reflection since the first word. I wish I could say you're free now, that you've survived. But you haven't. You've only transitioned. That's how the spiral wins. It never devours you whole. It reshapes you until you forget what it felt like to be outside of it. And by the time you remember, it's too late. You're part of the architecture. And like the bricks and beams of this cursed building, you too will be repurposed to hold up someone else's nightmare. You'll recognize it soon. The change, it begins with a name. Not yours, whispered into your dreams. Mine, maybe. Ava's, or one of the many before us whose names have been eaten by the spiral and spat back out as symbols. You'll wake with those names on your tongue. And then the walls will start listening to you, not the other way around. They'll shift subtly when you speak, learning your rhythm. The faucets will stutter in time with your heartbeat. The mirrors will bend your reflection into shapes your mind refuses to process fully. That's when you'll realize you're not alone. You never were, because we're all still here. Not ghosts, not figments. Facets, rewritten versions layered on like tracing paper, shadows echoing down the same corridors, living slightly out of phase. The building remembers us all, and it keeps us here, until we learn to become part of the spiral willingly. I didn't understand the full mechanics until the first person knocked on my door. A girl with trembling hands, holding a note that said, Point 3B, in a handwriting that was clearly mine, though I hadn't written it. She asked if I'd heard the scream. I didn't know what to tell her. I could only nod. It was then I realized I was not the protagonist anymore. I was the neighbor, the one who answers the door but doesn't remember why they're terrified, the one who used to be someone else somewhere else. Now I was just a point in her story, a supporting shape. That's how I learned the spiral's cruelest twist. It doesn't recycle victims, it recasts them. Every cycle, a new lead. Every loop, the same chorus of watchers, observers, former narrators who now whisper from the cracks and vents, just loud enough to guide but not enough to warn. Because warnings unravel the spiral, and the spiral cannot be unwound, only fed. And here's the final unbearable truth: I fed it with you. Every word I wrote, every line I etched into your mind through these pages, these entries, each was an invitation. I told myself I was warning you, saving you, but deep down I knew I was doing what the spiral needed, preserving the pattern, ensuring continuity. That's how it stays alive. Through stories, through tellers, and so I became its voice, its vessel, its pen. And now you're next, but not in the way you think. You won't disappear tonight. Not physically. The apartment won't devour you in a spectacle of blood and madness. There will be no monster in the closet, no final scream. That's not how it ends. The spiral fears endings. It only allows transformations. You'll remain for now. Still you, still sane, still free to leave if you want to pretend that's possible. But you'll carry the story with you, and it will mutate. Sooner or later, someone will ask why you keep all the mirrors covered, why you never talk about your time on Reseda Street. Why, when you hear the pipes rattle, you whisper, before even thinking, and you'll tell them. Just a little, just enough to get it off your chest, to feel lighter. And they'll listen, because of course they will. The spiral chooses good storytellers. They'll lean in, they'll get chills. They'll ask, so what happened next? And you'll smile. You'll start from the beginning. You'll say, I moved into apartment 3A, and it will begin again. That's the mechanism. That's the masterpiece. We are not victims. We are distribution. The spiral is not an entity. It's a method, a sacred recursion, a tale that folds back onto itself and becomes stronger each time someone dares to speak it aloud. And if you've read this far, if your pulse quickens every time you glance over your shoulder or hear your name whispered in a voice just slightly off pitch, then congratulations. You're no longer the reader. You're the archivist. You're the narrator. And the building, it's already forming around you. Maybe it's not brick and mortar this time. Maybe it's digital. Maybe it's a story someone reads on a quiet night in a house that creaks too much when it shouldn't. Maybe it's this exact story, on this exact page, read in a voice not your own, because the spiral isn't confined to places. It doesn't need floors or leases. All it needs is attention. All it needs is memory. And now it has yours. So I'll end where I began. With a whisper, not a scream. With one final word scratched into your reflection the next time your bathroom mirror fogs continue. Because even if you try to stop, even if you run, even if you bury this story in silence and salt and flame, someone somewhere will dig it back up, because they have to know what happened next, because the spiral never dies. It only waits, it only listens, and it remembers everything. Enjoyed the video? Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell so you never miss an update.